The morning sky over New Guinea was a muted sheet of silver, the kind that blurs the horizon and hides danger in its folds. Pilots had learned to fear that kind of sky. For a year, it belonged to the Japanese Zero, fast, agile, and undefeated across the Pacific War. On most days, American pilots climbed into their cockpits knowing they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and often outmatched. But on this morning, something felt different. 12 P-38. Lightning fighters rose through the humid air, their twin-boom silhouettes cutting clean lines against the clouds. Among them was a quiet young man from Wisconsin, a pilot whose face still held the softness of farm country, but whose instincts carried a sharpness the Pacific Theater had not yet seen. He said nothing unusual. He made no heroic speech. Yet the moment his P-38's engines settled into their steady roar, the balance of the air war began to shift. Before the day was over, Japanese pilots would speak of an American fighter ace who fought with impossible precision, someone who struck fast, disappeared, and returned from angles no one anticipated. Who was this pilot? And how did he rise from obscurity to become the most feared man in the Pacific sky? Long before the Pacific War carved its scars across the ocean, Richard Bong learned the quiet disciplines that would one day shape an American fighter ace. He grew up in the cold winds and tall pines of northern Wisconsin on a modest farm where work came with no shortcuts and no excuses. Each morning began with frost on the fields and ended with the quiet hum of rural life chores, school, the rhythm of a family that valued duty over comfort. It was in 1928, when Bong was 8 years old, that destiny first circled overhead. Mail planes bound for President Calvin Coolidge's summer retreat passed directly above the Bong farm, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. Other children might have watched and forgotten. Bong did not. In later letters, he wrote that something in him changed, that summer flying was no longer a dream, it became a direction. By high school, he was known for sharp observation and calm judgment traits, uncommon in someone his age. He excelled academically, but it was his marksmanship and patience in the Wisconsin woods that revealed a deeper instinct and understanding of angles, timing, and the importance of waiting for the perfect moment. These would become the foundations of his aerial combat philosophy. When he joined the civilian pilot training program in 1938, instructors noted a quality that could not be taught. Bong seemed to see the sky differently. He did not merely control an aircraft, he anticipated its behavior. His solo flight on his 20th birthday confirmed it. He handled the Piper Cub with a balance of confidence and humility, absorbing every detail as if the air itself were speaking to him. The world changed in 1941. 6 months before Pearl Harbor, Bong enlisted in the Army Air Corps Aviation Cadet Program. At Luke Field, Arizona, he trained under officers who would later become legends in their own right, including Captain Barry Goldwater. Goldwater remembered him not only for accuracy with a machine gun, but for the analytical mind that evaluated each burst of fire like a mathematician studying an equation. Still, nothing prepared Bong more than the first time he sat inside the cockpit of the P-38 Lightning. Its twin engines growled with a promise of speed and reach unmatched in the Pacific Theater. Many pilots feared its complexity. Bong embraced it. He understood immediately that the Lightning's strength, altitude, acceleration, and concentrated nose-mounted firepower were exactly what an American fighter ace would need against the Japanese Zero. But the Pacific War did not wait for anyone to be fully ready. By mid-1942, Bong found himself on the edge of an air war that America was still struggling to understand. The jungles of New Guinea stretched out beneath him like an endless green wall, and the Japanese Zero owned the sky with brutal confidence. What Richard Bong carried into that theater was not experience. It was something older, discipline, patience, and a young man's quiet belief that courage meant doing one's job even when the odds tilted the wrong way. When Richard Bong arrived in the South Pacific, he stepped into a world where the Japanese Zero dictated every engagement. The Zero was lighter, more agile, and at low altitude, nearly untouchable. Many American pilots learned this the hard way. But The Pacific War was changing, and so were the tactics that would decide its future. Initially assigned to a unit flying outdated P-40 Warhawks, Bong was temporarily attached to the 39th Fighter Squadron so he could fly the P-38 Lightning in actual combat. It was a decision that altered the trajectory of the air war. Under Captain Thomas Lynch, a rising tactician in the Pacific Theater, Bong absorbed lessons that would define the next generation of American fighter aces. Never turn with a Japanese Zero. Control altitude. Attack once with purpose, then vanish. On December 27, 1942, he put those lessons into practice for the first time. The sky over Buna was crowded with 40 Japanese aircraft, a mass of bombers guarded by fighters that had ruled the region for a year. Only 12 P-38s rose to meet them. Bong positioned himself above the formation, waited for a small opening, and dove. His first target, a Zero, chasing his commander, disintegrated under a precise burst at close range. His second, a Ki-43 Oscar, fell moments later. Japanese reports later described a twin-boom fighter attacking with a coordination they had not seen before. They did not know the pilot's name, but they felt the shift. Over the next days, Bong engaged in a series of brutal encounters along the New Britain coast. He refused to dogfight in the traditional sense. Instead, he fought vertically climbing diving, using the P-38 Lightning's speed to break free from the Zero's turning circle. His fifth kill came during an escort mission, a difficult deflection shot taken at long range while both aircraft twisted violently. It made him an American fighter ace, but it was only the beginning. By April 1943, Bong had earned 10 victories and a reputation for calm, controlled aggression. He fired only when the shot was certain. He never chased too far, and he always returned with the same methodical debrief, notes, angles, timing mistakes, improvements. Pilots began to study him as much as they admired him. Then came July the 26th, 1943, near Leh. A formation of 20 Japanese fighters approached, followed by 15 more reinforcements. The odds were overwhelming. The smart move, as Bong's own wingman later wrote, would have been to wait for support. Instead, he led 3 successive attacks into the heart of the enemy formation. On his first pass, he destroyed 2 aircraft with short surgical bursts. On the second, he split the formation and claimed 2 more. His wingman said he seemed to track multiple opponents at once, guiding their movements while executing his own. When the smoke cleared, 10 Japanese aircraft were down. 4 had fallen to Bong. None of the P-38s were lost. It was in battles like these that the legend began. Japanese pilots started warning each other about a twin-boom fighter with red wingtips, a machine flown by a man they called the Ghost. Richard Bong was no longer simply a skilled pilot. He was becoming the most feared American fighter ace in the Pacific War. By the summer of 1943, Richard Bong was no longer just a promising pilot, he was a rising force in the Pacific War. With 15 victories, he was promoted to captain, though he wore the new rank with quiet discomfort. Fame had begun to follow him, carried across the ocean in dispatches that praised an American fighter ace who fought with unmatched precision in the P-38 Lightning. Yet Bong remained focused on the one thing that mattered to him, doing his job and bringing his men home alive. What set him apart was not bravado, but restraint. Many pilots chase glory. Bong chased certainty. He refused to fire unless the shot was perfect. He refused to risk his wingman for a chance at another kill. In a war that often rewarded aggression, he chose discipline and survived because of it. Then almost abruptly, the war gave him a brief reprieve. In late 1943, General Guinea sent Bong home for rest, though the deeper purpose was clear. Losing America's top prospect in the Pacific would have been a blow to morale. During that leave, Bong met Marjorie Vattendahl, a young woman from his home region, whose intelligence and warmth disarmed him more thoroughly than any Zero pilot ever could. Their connection was immediate. When Bong returned to combat in 1944, he carried her photograph on the nose of his P-38 Lightning, a gesture that made the aircraft known across the squadron as Marge. It became one of the most recognizable fighters in the Pacific theater. But even symbols are fragile. In March 1944, another pilot flying Marge suffered an engine failure and crashed into the New Guinea jungle. Bong never saw his namesake aircraft again. For a man who rarely revealed emotion, the loss hit deeper than he admitted. Yet he continued flying, mounting Marge's photograph inside the cockpit of whichever Lightning he was assigned. April 1944 marked another turning point. With his 27th victory, he surpassed Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record, becoming the highest-scoring American fighter ace in history. Letters poured in. Newspapers celebrated him. Life magazine published his photograph. Americans finally had a hero to champion in a war whose early years had felt uncertain. Bong appreciated the praise but wanted none of the spotlight. He wrote to Marge that he felt guilty being away from his squadron, guilty standing on stages while others risked their lives in the Pacific War. Yet the tour achieved its purpose. War bond sales surged, enlistments rose, and workers in American factories found renewed motivation, knowing pilots like Bong depended on their hands. When he returned to the Pacific in late 1944, General Guinea reassigned him to headquarters as an advanced gunnery instructor. He was allowed to fly but not to seek combat. Bong immediately found the loophole. If combat found him, he could respond. And combat found him often. The skies over the Philippines had become a crucible of desperate resistance. Japanese fighters, dwindling in number, fought with increasing ferocity, and kamikaze attacks pressed American forces to their limits. Through these months, Bong's victories climbed to 30, then 35, and finally 40, all confirmed by gun camera footage and witness reports. His attacks remained the same close-range bursts, 2 or 3 seconds at most, followed by a steep climb out of danger. It was methodical, deadly, and uniquely his. On December 12, 1944, General Douglas MacArthur presented him the Medal of Honor at Tacloban Airfield. 5 days later, Bong scored his 40th kill. Both Guinea and MacArthur agreed his war was over. He had given more than enough. Richard Bong left the Pacific War as America's undisputed ace of aces. But history was not finished with him. From the American perspective, Richard Bong's rise offered something the nation desperately needed: proof that the United States could outthink and outfight a seasoned enemy in the Pacific War. Newspapers called him the Ace of Aces, a title that carried both admiration and weight. Factories hung his photograph near assembly lines. Workers tightening bolts on P-38 Lightning engines reminded one another, "This is for men like Bong." In a conflict thousands of miles from home, he became a symbol of American precision discipline and quiet resolve. Yet Bong himself never embraced the role. In letters to Marge, he admitted discomfort with public attention. He felt out of place at speeches and ceremonies, believing that the real burden of the war was carried by those who remained in the Pacific theater. This humility only amplified the respect he commanded back home. To many Americans, he represented an ideal, the citizen warrior who fought because duty required it, not because glory beckoned. Across the ocean, however, the name Richard Bong carried a very different meaning. Japanese pilots began warning new aviators about a twin-boom fighter with red wing tips, a P-38 Lightning flown by a man they nicknamed the Ghost. After-action reports in the final years of the Pacific War reveal a shift from confidence to anxiety. The Japanese Zero had dominated early battles, but it was designed for maneuverability, not durability, against Bong's energy tactics. High-altitude approaches, steep diving attacks, and rapid disengagement, the Zero stood little chance. Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most respected aces, later admitted that the appearance of the P-38 changed the psychological balance of the war. American pilots could now choose the terms of engagement. They could strike from above, break contact, and return when conditions favored them. The Japanese Zero was forced into a defensive posture it had never been designed for. Bong's influence extended far beyond his personal victories. His combat reports became instructional material. His close-range firing philosophy, wait close the distance, then fire a controlled burst, was woven into U.S. fighter training doctrine. He demonstrated that air superiority was not won through reckless pursuit, but through preparation, discipline, and analysis under pressure. By late 1944, both sides understood the truth. Richard Bong had reshaped the air war in the Pacific theater. He had become more than an American fighter ace. He was proof that mastery in the sky depended not only on the aircraft, but on the mind guiding it. For Richard Bong, the war ended not in the cockpit of his P-38 Lightning, but in the quiet sun of a California afternoon. On August 6, 1945, the same day the world learned of Hiroshima, America's greatest fighter pilot climbed into a jet that represented the future of aviation. The P-80 Shooting Star accelerated down the runway, lifted cleanly, and then faltered. A failing fuel pump, a split-second decision, and too little altitude to survive the fall. After more than 200 missions in the Pacific War, after defeating the Japanese Zero again and again, the ace of aces lost his life within sight of home. He was 24 years old. Across the United States, the news felt like a punctuation mark on the war, not triumphant, but somber. Marge Bong married only 6 months, faced a grief that never fully softened. General Guinea attended the funeral himself, standing beside the family who had sent a quiet Wisconsin farm boy to fight in distant jungles. The community that raised him welcomed him home, but not in the way anyone had hoped. And yet Richard Bong's legacy did not end in that moment. His 40 confirmed victories remain an American record, a testament to a form of aerial combat that has passed into history: close-range gunfights, instinctive maneuvering, and the razor-thin line between survival and loss. Future wars would bring missiles, jets, and split-second engagements, but none would produce an American fighter ace with a tally like his. More important than the number was the method. Bong proved that the sky belonged not to the boldest pilot, but to the most disciplined. He taught that patience could defeat aggression, that preparation could overcome experience, and that protecting one's wingman was as vital as claiming a victory. Long after the Pacific War ended, these lessons shaped generations of American aviators. Today, memorials across the country bear his name. A restored P-38 Lightning stands in Superior, Wisconsin, its twin booms a silent reminder of the young man who once ruled the air from New Guinea to the Philippines. Even in 2024, when the crash site of Marge was rediscovered in the Papua New Guinea jungle, it felt less like an archaeological find and more like the final chapter of a story that still moves people 80 years later. History often remembers wars by their battles, but sometimes it remembers them by the individuals who carried extraordinary burdens with quiet dignity. If Richard Bong's story stays with you, consider sharing what you believe his greatest legacy is. And if you'd like to explore more moments that shaped the Pacific War and the pilots who fought it, I invite you to join us for the next chapter.